In the heart of Singapore, there lies Kalang Riverside Park, a place that epitomizes tranquility. The park, with its lush green lawns and scenic views, offers a respite from the bustling city life. People flock to this peaceful retreat for leisurely walks, family outings, and outdoor sports, including rowing and boat racing on the Kalang River. This river, Singapore's longest, is not just a beautiful sight, it also serves as a critical source of fresh water for the island. The park, with its serene atmosphere, seemed like the last place where anything violent could happen. But on June 16, 2005, this peaceful setting was torn apart. A janitor, simply doing his routine cleanup along the riverbank, stumbled upon a sight that would forever change his life and the lives of many others. As he moved a cardboard box resting near the river, he noticed something unusual. The box, tightly sealed with tape, looked like any other discarded container. He was about to toss it into the trash when the box suddenly gave way, spilling its contents onto the sandy shore. What spilled out was beyond any nightmare. Among the littered debris of newspaper and plastic, lay part of a human body. The janitor froze, his heart racing as he stared at the horrifying discovery. The body was dismembered, the lower half completely devoid of blood, and shockingly preserved in a way that seemed almost deliberate. In a state of shock and panic, the janitor immediately contacted the police. The authorities arrived at the scene, and what they uncovered sent chills through their spines. The body, though badly mutilated, was unmistakably human. But more troubling than the gruesome disfigurement was the fact that it had been placed so carelessly. As the police examined the scene, they found traces of a Chinese-language newspaper nearby, a simple clue that would soon reveal much more than they could have anticipated. The Lian Bao, a popular Chinese-language newspaper in Singapore, seemed to hold the key to unraveling the mystery. The newspaper pieces were traced back to Singapore, but the real breakthrough came when the police connected the clue to a missing persons report. The victim was identified as 22-year-old Liao Hongmei, a migrant worker who had come from Chongqing, China, to work in Singapore. She had been living there for 3 years, toiling away in an electronics factory on Serangoon Road. Her colleagues had last seen her a few days prior, and her sudden disappearance had raised alarms. But no one, not even the most experienced detectives, could have anticipated how far this case would go. The discovery of the lower half of Liao Hongmei's body was only the beginning. What seemed like an open and shut case would quickly spiral into a tragic and complicated investigation. As the police delved deeper into her life, they uncovered unsettling details about her relationship with a man named Liang Shao-sheng, a 55-year-old married manager at the same factory where she worked. Their connection was once dismissed as harmless an office romance that many had whispered about but few had taken seriously. But the further the investigation went, the more chilling the reality of their relationship became. Was this a case of passion gone horribly wrong, or was there a darker, more calculated motive behind the murder of Liao Hongmei? As the mystery deepened, the police had only one thing in mind: finding out what had truly happened to this young woman. How had she ended up dismembered in a cardboard box by the riverbank? And who was responsible for taking her life? The answers were out there, and the police were determined to uncover them, no matter the cost. This chilling case was just beginning to unfold, and the public would soon learn that it wasn't just the death of one woman, but a tale of manipulation, deceit, and an abuse of trust. The identity of the killer was yet to be revealed, but the clues were starting to paint a much darker picture than anyone could have imagined. As the investigation progressed, the focus quickly shifted to Liang Shao-sheng, a 55-year-old manager at the electronics factory where Liao Hongmei worked. At first, Liang didn't seem like a prime suspect. He was married with children and held a stable position in the factory, a man seemingly too established to be involved in something so sinister. However, as the police began to delve deeper into Liao Hongmei's past and the circumstances surrounding her disappearance, they started to uncover troubling details about her relationship with Liang. What initially appeared to be a harmless office romance quickly became a source of intense suspicion. The relationship between Liang and Liao had been the subject of whispers among their co-workers. While the two tried to keep their interactions professional, they couldn't escape the prying eyes of their colleagues. Liao Hongmei, a hard-working and ambitious young woman from China, had been promoted twice since joining the factory, a feat that many believed was linked to her relationship with Liang. Her colleagues had noticed the two spending more time together, often seen whispering in corners or exchanging glances when they thought no one was watching. The most unsettling reports came from the factory's staff, who claimed to have seen them openly embracing and even kissing. These encounters, although not overtly inappropriate, were enough to spark gossip among the workers. The factory management had caught wind of their closeness, and a disciplinary action had been taken after an incident in which the two were caught embracing during work hours. While Liao Hongmei had admitted to the mistake and received a verbal warning, Liang Shao-sheng had refused to accept responsibility, claiming that their public display of affection was merely a misunderstanding. Despite the reprimand, their relationship continued to evolve. Liao Hongmei, who had come to Singapore with dreams of a better life, now found herself tangled in a complex, possibly dangerous, situation. She had no family in Singapore, and her life was largely centered around her work at the factory. Her relationship with Liang became a source of both personal comfort and public scrutiny. As the police pieced together her life, it became clear that Liao Hongmei was at a crossroads, caught between her desire for a better future and the reality of the toxic relationship she had unknowingly stepped into. As her disappearance became more pronounced, the suspicion around Liang Shao-sheng only grew. When her co-workers confirmed that the two had been seen together frequently in private, the picture started to form. The last known person to see Liao Hongmei was, in fact, Liang himself. The timing was too coincidental, and the pattern too unsettling. At this point, the police couldn't ignore the possibility that the man at the center of the factory's drama might be involved in something far darker than anyone had realized. The investigation now had a face to match the crime, but the question remained, could this seemingly mild-mannered manager truly be capable of murder? Or was there something more insidious lurking beneath his calm exterior? As the police gathered more evidence, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, and the chilling truth about Liao Hongmei's final days was slowly being revealed. With the emergence of new clues, the investigation was far from over, but one thing was certain: the mystery surrounding her death was far more complicated than anyone had initially thought. To fully understand the complexity of Liang Shao-sheng, it's important to take a closer look at his past. Born into a modest family in Singapore, Liang's early life was far from easy. From a young age, he had to contend with the pressures of living in a low-income household, which shaped his outlook on life. His childhood was marked by a constant struggle to keep up with the more fortunate children around him. He often felt overlooked and undervalued, a feeling that would later manifest in his adult life. In his youth, Liang was ambitious, eager to escape the limitations of his humble beginnings. However, his ambitions were often ill-directed. After graduating from high school, he began his career path by working at Singapore Telecommunications in 1976, where he stayed for 2 decades. However, his journey was far from smooth. While he excelled in his work, he remained socially isolated, a man of few friends, and someone who internalized much of his frustration. In 1996, facing the stagnation of his career at the telecommunications company, Liang decided to take a bold step. He left his steady job to start his own business. His decision, however, would prove disastrous. His business venture, though promising at first, collapsed within a year. The failure left Liang not just financially strained, but emotionally shattered. His failure haunted him, but instead of using it as a lesson to rebuild, he fell into a depressive spiral. He returned to salaried work, eventually finding a job as a production supervisor at an electronics factory. Despite his career setbacks, Liang managed to secure a stable position at the factory, where he worked long, exhausting hours. However, his career wasn't the only aspect of his life that was troubled. It was here at the factory that he met Liao Hongmei, a young, diligent worker from China who had moved to Singapore in search of a better life. Over time, the two began a personal relationship, one that would not stay private for long. While their romance appeared innocent at first, it was soon clouded by manipulation, secrecy, and control. Liang, despite his outwardly calm demeanor, harbored a dark side that began to show itself as his relationship with Liao Hongmei deepened. He was no stranger to manipulative behavior. In fact, it was part of his personality, honed over years of dealing with personal setbacks. Liang was used to getting his way, and when things didn't go according to plan, he became frustrated and volatile. As their relationship grew, so did the tension between them. What had started as a workplace romance turned into something far more complicated, with Liang exerting more control over Liao Hongmei. He found himself drawn to her youth and naivete, manipulating her emotions to suit his needs. However, Liao Hongmei had her own aspirations and dreams, and she was determined to find a better future for herself. The friction between their desires created an environment of constant conflict. Liang's controlling nature began to take its toll, pushing Hongmei further away emotionally. But Liang wasn't content to simply accept their growing distance. His pride and his fears about his own shortcomings led him to believe that if he couldn't have her, no one else could. This toxic mindset, driven by insecurity and possessiveness, would eventually push him to the edge, leading to the horrific tragedy that unfolded on June 15, 2005. Liang's past, a mixture of failures, insecurities, and manipulative tendencies, was the breeding ground for the tragedy that would ultimately befall Liao Hongmei. His troubled history was not just a series of unfortunate events, but the creation of a man who, despite his career stability, had not resolved the darker parts of his psyche. This personal history, filled with unresolved frustration and the need to control, set the stage for the deadly confrontation that would cost Hongmei her life. On June 15, 2005, what seemed to be an innocent visit to Liang Shao-sheng's house took a sinister turn. Liao Hongmei, who had been struggling with her relationship with Liang, arrived at his home with hopes of resolving their issues. However, unbeknownst to her, this meeting would be her last. As the day wore on, tensions escalated, and what began as a conversation soon spiraled into violence. The details surrounding the crime were deeply disturbing, and the investigation would uncover a series of chilling clues that painted a horrifying picture of what transpired. The police, after being alerted to Liao Hongmei's disappearance, soon turned their focus on Liang Shao-sheng. The search of his home revealed a string of damning evidence that connected him directly to her murder. First, they found several green plastic bags exactly like those used to wrap her body and some suspicious items that suggested something far more nefarious had unfolded within those walls. Among these items were blood-stained clothes, a broken knife, and a rubber hammer. The presence of these objects suggested that violence had erupted in the house, but there was more. Liang's attempts to cover his tracks left behind subtle yet undeniable traces of the crime. Despite the surface-level cleanliness of the home, the police were quick to notice that it was too perfect, almost unnaturally so. It was clear that Liang had made a calculated effort to erase any signs of the horrific event. However, he had missed some key details. The bathroom, where the crime was believed to have taken place, appeared spotless at first glance, but the more the officers investigated, the more unsettling the scene became. A drop of blood, faint but unmistakable, was discovered in the toilet bowl, an ominous trace left behind in a home that had been meticulously cleaned. As the investigation unfolded, the police pieced together the disturbing events that led to the murder. Liang's behavior during the interrogation became more erratic. Initially, he denied any involvement in Liao Hongmei's death, offering explanations for the evidence found in his home. However, his story started to unravel as the police connected the dots. His fingerprints were found on the knife, and his blood-stained clothes were not a mere accident. The entire scene in his home painted a chilling portrait of a man who, in a fit of anger, had taken a life in a cold and calculated manner. The crime scene, despite its apparent order, was a stark reflection of the darkness hidden behind Liang's facade. His failure to control his emotions had resulted in a violent outburst, one that would forever change his life and the life of the woman he claimed to love. Liao Hongmei, once a bright young woman with aspirations and dreams, was gone, and the investigation into her murder exposed the disturbing depths of Liang Shao-sheng's character. After his arrest, Liang Shao-sheng initially confessed to the murder of Liao Hongmei. He spoke about the events that led to her tragic death, claiming that in a moment of rage, he had taken her life. But as his confession unfolded, cracks began to appear in his story. The police, trained to spot inconsistencies, quickly realized that his account was filled with contradictions. The details he provided didn't quite align with the evidence that had been gathered at the scene. He described a violent confrontation, but the physical evidence didn't fully support his version of events. As the investigation continued, forensic experts worked tirelessly to piece together the truth. Bloodstains were found in places that didn't match the narrative Liang had provided. His story about how the crime occurred, about the struggle, the emotions, and the sequence of events became more and more difficult to believe as the days went on. Liang's shifting statements, from confessing with apparent remorse to backpedaling and making claims of coercion, painted a picture of a man who was desperately trying to manipulate the situation in his favor. The police were torn. On one hand, they had a confession, something that is often the key piece of evidence in a murder investigation. On the other hand, there was a growing sense that Liang's confession was not entirely voluntary. Could he have been pressured into admitting something he didn't do? The investigators knew they had to get to the bottom of this, as they could not let a possible miscarriage of justice unfold. Doubts about the authenticity of his confession started to surface when it was revealed that Liang had been subjected to intense interrogation. While it's not uncommon for suspects to be grilled by the police, there was growing concern that Liang's confession may have been coerced. Could he have been pressured into admitting guilt, perhaps even fabricated details in the heat of the moment, in an attempt to end the constant questioning and psychological pressure? The forensic evidence continued to mount against him, providing chilling clues that further contradicted his version of the events. Small, seemingly insignificant details like the bloodstains on his clothes, the broken knife, and the meticulous cleaning of his home told a different story. These pieces of evidence hinted at a calculated and cold act of murder, not a momentary lapse of judgment during a fit of rage. As the investigation unfolded, the police began to question whether Liang's confession was truly reliable. The doubts were palpable, and the case took on a new complexity. Was he truly the murderer, or was there something else at play? The police couldn't afford to jump to conclusions. They had to dig deeper and consider every possibility, especially as the evidence started to reveal more about Liang's dark motives. As the race against time continued, the case grew even more intense. The police had to determine whether they could trust his confession or if there was more to the story, if there was something he was hiding, or someone else who may have been involved. This case, already tragic, had become a web of lies, manipulation, and uncertainty. And the truth, it seemed, was harder to reach than anyone had anticipated. The trial of Liang Shao-sheng became a spectacle that gripped the public's attention, turning into a high-profile case that was talked about for weeks across Singapore. The courtroom was filled with tension as both sides presented their arguments, each trying to shape the narrative of what truly happened on that fateful day. The prosecution, led by a team of determined lawyers, wasted no time in painting a grim picture of Liang Shao-sheng. They portrayed him as a man driven by greed, pride, and a deep sense of entitlement. He had manipulated a young woman into a relationship, taking advantage of her trust, and when she threatened to expose his deceit, he silenced her permanently. According to the prosecution, this was a cold, calculated crime. The evidence, they argued, showed a man willing to kill to protect his reputation and his secrets. On the other hand, the defense took a very different approach. They fought tooth and nail to discredit the confession that had played such a pivotal role in the prosecution's case. According to the defense, Liang's confession had been coerced, obtained under duress during a long and intense interrogation. They claimed that the police had pressured him into admitting guilt, using psychological tactics that led him to say things he didn't fully mean. Liang's lawyers argued that his shifting story was proof that he was not confessing willingly, but rather, had been manipulated into doing so by the officers who were investigating the case. As the trial progressed, the courtroom became a battleground for public opinion. On one side, many believed that Liang was guilty, a man who had let his desires and greed get the better of him, leading him to commit a terrible crime. His confession, despite its inconsistencies, seemed damning enough for many. For those who believed in his guilt, the case felt like an open and shut story, a man guilty of murder, driven by his own self-interest. But there were also others who remained unconvinced by the evidence. They saw Liang as a victim of a miscarriage of justice, a man who had been wrongly accused and unfairly pressured into a confession. The defense team played on the idea that Liang had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, and that the police had failed to properly investigate all the facts before rushing to arrest him. To these people, the case was not about justice, but about the flaws in the legal system that led to an innocent man being put on trial for a crime he didn't commit. The media circus surrounding the trial only added to the tension. News outlets competed to cover every detail of the case, from the testimonies in court to the latest twists in the investigation. The public's thirst for justice became even more intense, with each new revelation feeding the fire of public opinion. Was Liang truly guilty of murder, or had he been wrongfully accused and manipulated into confessing to a crime he didn't commit? The case raised important questions about the reliability of confessions and the lengths the authorities might go to secure a conviction. Outside the courtroom, public outcry began to grow. Supporters of both sides rallied, some holding vigils for Liao Hongmei, the young woman whose life had been tragically taken, while others marched for the fair treatment of Liang Shao-sheng, believing that his confession had been unjustly forced. It seemed as though no one could agree on the truth, and the more the trial progressed, the more divided the public became. For the people watching, the case wasn't just about one man's fate, it was a reflection of the larger issues within the justice system. Could a confession truly be trusted if it was obtained under duress? How could the police be sure they had the right man, especially when doubts lingered about the handling of evidence and the reliability of witness statements? These were the questions that loomed over the trial, and as the verdict drew nearer, the tension continued to mount. In January 2006, after months of intense deliberation, the Singapore court finally delivered its verdict. Liang Shao-sheng was found guilty of the brutal murder of Liao Hongmei. The gravity of the crime and the chilling details that had unfolded in the trial led to a sentencing that shocked many. Liang was sentenced to death. His fate seemed sealed, and the court's decision appeared to bring justice to the victim, Liao Hongmei, whose life had been cut short in a horrific and senseless act. However, despite the finality of the verdict, the aftermath of the case left many lingering questions about the justice system, the role of confessions, and the power of the media. Liang Shao-sheng's supporters, a group that had rallied behind him throughout the trial, were not ready to let go of the idea that he had been wrongfully convicted. For them, the story wasn't one of a guilty man facing the consequences of his actions but of an innocent individual who had been coerced into confessing a crime he didn't commit. They believed that the confession was obtained under duress, influenced by the intense pressure from law enforcement, and that the evidence presented in the case was not enough to conclusively prove his guilt. The media, which had played a significant role in keeping the case in the public eye, added fuel to this fire. News outlets, journalists, and social media platforms continued to debate whether Liang had truly been given a fair trial or whether the judicial system had faltered under the weight of public opinion and media scrutiny. The case had become more than just about a man's guilt or innocence. It had morphed into a larger conversation about the fairness of confessions obtained under intense pressure, the reliability of evidence in criminal cases, and the extent to which the media can shape the outcome of a trial. For many, the trial raised questions about how far authorities could go in their pursuit of a confession. Was it possible that the police had crossed a line in their interrogation methods? The doubts surrounding the confession, combined with the ongoing media coverage, cast a shadow over the case. Some believed that the emotional and psychological pressure placed on Liang during his interrogations led to his erratic behavior and inconsistent statements. While the prosecution had pointed to the confession as the key to securing a conviction, others wondered whether the confession was truly a reflection of guilt or simply the result of manipulation. Liang's supporters continued to fight for his innocence, arguing that the trial had been rushed and that the evidence presented wasn't enough to justify a death sentence. Their persistent belief in his innocence reflected a deep-seated mistrust in the judicial system, and they maintained that Liang was a victim of both a flawed legal process and a media-driven public frenzy. They demanded a retrial, convinced that the truth had yet to be fully revealed. As the years passed, the case remained a hot topic of debate, a symbol of the complexities involved in the pursuit of justice. It was not just about the murder of Liao Hongmei, it was about the broader implications of how we view guilt, innocence, and the justice system itself. The case forced the public to confront uncomfortable questions about the reliability of confessions and the role of the media in influencing the outcome of criminal cases. It also sparked a broader conversation about the fairness of the legal process and whether true justice had been served. Liang's supporters, despite the death sentence, continued their campaign, fueling the fire of doubt. They were relentless, pushing for a reconsideration of the case, advocating for a system that, in their eyes, had failed to deliver a fair trial. The legacy of this case lives on as a poignant reminder of the complexities of justice, the weight of public opinion, and the enduring influence of the media in shaping our perceptions of guilt and innocence. The case of Liang Shao-sheng remains a tragic and deeply unsettling reminder of the dark complexities of human nature and the dangerous power of manipulation. The story of Liao Hongmei, a young woman who came to Singapore in search of a better life, was tragically cut short by the very person she trusted. Her life was taken by Liang, a man who had once been her supervisor, a figure she likely believed was a mentor and someone she could rely on. However, Liang's true nature was one of deceit and selfishness, and it was his manipulative behavior that led to a heart-wrenching betrayal. Liao Hongmei's story continues to resonate, not just as a personal tragedy but also as a cautionary tale for us all. It serves as a stark reminder of how easily trust can be abused, and how appearances can be deceiving. Beneath the surface of a seemingly innocent relationship, there can lie a darkness that we are often blind to until it is too late. This case forces us to question the motivations of those around us, urging us not to take things at face value. The truth, as we often find, is far more complex than it first appears, and this tragic event underscores the importance of truly understanding the full story before making any judgments. As we reflect on this heartbreaking case, we must also recognize the lessons it imparts about self-protection, vigilance, and the importance of a fair and thorough investigation. Liao Hongmei, like many others, sought to build a better life for herself and trusted those around her. Yet, in the end, her trust was exploited, leading to an untimely and brutal death. This should remind us of the necessity of being cautious, especially when we find ourselves vulnerable in unfamiliar environments. We must always be aware of the people we allow into our lives, the relationships we form, and the trust we give, as there are those who would use it against us. Furthermore, this case highlights the need for fair, unbiased, and diligent investigations. The police, through meticulous work and unwavering determination, were able to uncover the truth behind Liao Hongmei's death. However, the case also exposed the flaws in the system, with many questioning the reliability of confessions under pressure and the role of the media in shaping public perception. The pursuit of justice is not always a straightforward path, and it is up to society to ensure that no stone is left unturned in the quest for truth. In the end, Liao Hongmei's death was not just the end of a young woman's life but also a painful loss for her family, who had hopes and dreams for her future. She was a woman full of promise, someone who had built a life far from home in pursuit of a better future. But through her tragic story, we are reminded that life can be fragile, and that we must always strive to protect ourselves and the ones we love from those who might take advantage of our vulnerabilities. Let us not forget the lessons from this story, to question everything, to never jump to conclusions, and to always seek the truth, no matter how uncomfortable or painful it may be. The case of Liang Shao-sheng and Liao Hongmei reminds us that justice is often complex, and only through careful, thorough investigation and a commitment to fairness can we hope to uncover the truth. May her story, though tragic, inspire us all to be more cautious, more aware, and more determined to seek justice in the face of adversity.